Monseigneur, Madam, Your Excellencies, dear friends, I'd like to begin by reminding us, and I feel this is one of my favorite contemporary theologians, and I'll talk Father Chéri, to say that it is not a Dominican, but a Jesuit. And I know that this has particular significance here, where we are in a Dominican building. And in his remarkable book titled Believing All the Same, Father Joseph Mans talks about the consequences of theologic and religious faith. And he says it in these terms. There are times when problems of this nature but don't come all at once like this in our time. It appeared more prudent to theologians and religious authorities to just sit and wait and stay quiet, to not disturb the faith of the believers, and wait for spirits to quieten down and find a solution, and generally to hope that the problem is forgotten. But the crisis today is far too general and touches too many vital issues to expect and hope that it will just disappear with time. Of course, the problem that Joseph Mans refers to here is obviously first and foremost theological progress of instruction and rationality have put into question the very existence of God and sending man back to his finiteness and instilling a doubt that has never been as vivid as it is today. But what I like in this statement, and I feel that it has a real connection with this evening's topic, is that if you draw on the thread, I feel it applies clearly to part of the existential crisis that our societies are experiencing, and as you expressed, Mr. Chair, but in particular in relation to technology. I should have begun by saying, dear friends, that first of all, I am very pleased to speak here in this week when France is putting technology in an honorable position on one of the major decisive issues for our time. And I believe deeply that the answer that we give will determine a major part of our collective future. The first note that I would say is when I say we, us, I'm thinking, of course, of France, but also more of Europe. And I'm talking about the European continent specifically because it seems that the issue of trust in technology is first and foremost Western, and within the Western society, essentially European. And I was struck by a survey last year which questioned the population of many countries as to their perception of artificial intelligence. And the French associated artificial intelligence as being negative, 65%. The Germans, 51%. The Americans, 51%. Sorry. No, sorry. It was the Germans, 61%, the Americans, 51%, and Chinese only 21%. And I believe there's a first lesson to be drawn from this, is that the suspicion about technology is not global, worldwide, but is first and foremost European. And what's paradoxical is that in these countries where we're the most protected and the GDPR adoption most recently is an illustration of this, is that the awareness is greatest. And having said that, I think it's useful before we try to see how we can rebuild trust is to understand what is the factor in this mistrust. Technology, by definition, has always had a relatively complicated relationship with trust, for a very simple reason. By definition, innovation is a disruptive event that upsets established order and slips into the gaps of our legal systems, and intrinsically, therefore, creates mistrust at the very beginning. But innovation then, to be disseminated, needs to build up this trust that it eliminated at the outset. And to take a very concrete example, the phenomenon that we're experiencing with blockchains. with blockchains and more particularly with crypto monies. Cryptocurrencies we've seen developing within these legal gaps and web interloping spaces on the margins of traditional finance, and created fascinating or phenomena of fascination and also systemic fear about the end of the banking model and a general collapse of our economies, that neither one has happened. And what is particularly interesting is that to develop today, they have to build trust, because trust is the basic element of a currency. Consequently, this new technology, which is essentially thought of in distributed terms, is today seeking the labeling, or at least the publicly expressed trust of the governments. And this is what French government has been doing, to have the label Serum Innovation, or proposing putting a fiscal context to define the norms. Now, what is interesting is that in this type of technology is born out of this mistrust, because it comes from a disruptive creativeness and then is spread. The phenomenon is well known, and of course I am not the first to mention it. Progress is systematically suspected of being a harbinger of misfortune, and we have to perceive the alienation that it is seen to bring. And the countries which have experienced the greatest technological innovations have always lived this dialectic between positivism and obscurantist thinking. And if I could put a humor, progress is intrinsically a bearer of the at once and at once at the same time. This is a reference to one of President Macron's favorite phrases at the beginning. And in fact, these are tasks today that can be done in a way that in the past used to kill people. And we need to bear in mind that despite our high level of unemployment and social difficulties, never has the active population in our developed countries been so numerous. If I take the example of artificial intelligence, which does have a dehumanizing risk, but nevertheless presents phenomenal progress, for example, in the healing of a number of orphan diseases or certain cancers. But again, the truth is a question of perception. Will yesterday's truth still be true tomorrow? And these new technologies, as brought by the transhumanists, will they enable us to be more effective, or will they actually take over from us? And any progress is always a source of concern and questioning. And our period is typical of that, because science today is reaching a level of complexity that has never existed before. A level of complexity that the blockchain I was mentioning earlier, or quantum research, probably the most esoterical questioning. It's almost impossible for the man on the street, but even for the minister that I am, to fully understand what all this is about. It's quite tempting, I would admit, to say in this deficit of explanation the real cause of the wariness of our societies with regard to technology. For a very simple reason, is that human beings have always feared what they did not understand. And personally, I do not really accept such an explanation. First of all, there is, in that case, no reason for the West to be more suspicious than the East. And also, if we stand back a bit, it should be rather the reverse phenomenon that's happening, because our intellectual baggage, or the average education of our societies, has never been so widespread. And the fact is that in the past, our previous generations have never had such a concentration of effect of knowing so much and at the same time being so fearful. At the same time, what I do deeply believe is the existential crisis that Europe is experiencing with respect to technology has nothing to do with technology in and of itself, but with technology as a tool of a suspected non-desirable future. And I saw it coming here that the slogan of these Geotech Days is "Come and experience the future." And I think that is the issue. Our fellow citizens really want to experience this future at a time when a major part of the Europeans feel that their children will live worse off than they did? Now, I think the crisis that is hitting science is the rampant crisis of lack of security that the chairman was talking about, a loss of meaning, of which Brexit and the votes for extremes, or the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests in France, are the democratic and social expression. If we think about it a couple of minutes, it's not surprising that the most restricted country is France, a country that was described by two economists as a nation of mistrust, where the future is always seen with a pessimism that no other developed country expresses. And I think it's interesting to note, if we look at the conflicting history of French trade unionism and that of the declining positivism of our country, to see our country as one of those where the principle of precaution nearly always takes precedence over the spirit of innovation. And I think this reveals major failures, more even than technological progress. I believe that it is the elites that pointed out, with the idea that a minority is taking advantage of the innovation while keeping the majority on the margins, subservient to maintaining a majority in the service. And we could think in this case of what Yuval Ari wrote in his last book. Now, we understand that technology and those who serve it have done nothing to really make their cause more defendable. And this is the sociology of technology, which is very fundamentally the white males under 40 coming from university, and the highlight of civical value, where you see the latest buildings with hobos and beggars lying at their doors, and all kinds of abuse that can be seen in terms of commercial relations, and also what the American technological giants have for European values, for example. Not to mention those who conceptualized the exercise by imagining buying an island to escape collective rules. I would add a very pragmatic point. And that is when individual experience of an American drug addict or a French yellow vest is decided by the lack of networks and small groceries shutting down because of Amazon and so on. Then what happens is the user experience in the digital world is not really up to the promises that has been made. So what should we do? This diagnosis is both reassuring and worrying for scientists, and to say very frankly, I feel the problem is more on the political side than on the technological side. It seems to me, first of all, to be an echo of the need to reconnect with a collective narrative that we have lost, that of the 20th century, be they communists, fascists, or liberals. The first two have disappeared, and the third one is pretty much the sick man of Europe now. It seems to me, therefore, that we have to reinvent a new narrative of conquest at the European level, and paradoxically claiming that the technology is a key to this. We have the resources for it, in fact. If you look at the nationality of the people who today, in the major American technologies, are driving development and research, or even the applications of artificial intelligence, they are nearly almost all are French or European. And it's something that I am convinced of, is that if technology was not perceived as the tool of a foreign domination, be it American or maybe later Chinese, is seen as the tool for preserving a social model in a world where the leader defines the norm. And in that case, rejection of technology could be different. And above this narrative, I feel there's the importance of onboarding all European citizens in this technological development. And the fact is, in all European countries, we're all lagging behind. Because mastering the excesses of technological development will not be useful if there's still the technological breakthrough. To say things practically, is one French person out of 5, 13 million people who do not use internet. This states the level of our ambition. We need to connect these people, train them, for those who can be trained, and provide solutions closer to them. And for those who either have a special disability or too old, give them support to use these digital tools, because what is certain is that if we do not provide everyone, whatever their condition of wealth or disability, that technological access, by definition, the technological ecosystem and all the statements we can make around that will be in vain and will merely lead to further exclusion. And you mentioned earlier the social and societal responsibility of technological companies, and this notion of accountability is the wager that the President of the Republic has made in the Tech for Good event tomorrow at the Élysée Palace, to bring people from technology to commit to the social issues of our time. But will and self-regulation will not always be sufficient, and sometimes it is necessary to regulate from above. And regulating means laying the general direction of the best interest to avoid that digital space becomes a space of outlaw and lawlessness. And I think we have to get back to the fundamentals. Apply the law, define transparency, set the objectives of players who've become so powerful that their definitional standards have an impact on our economy and our society and even on our private life. And these standards that the President has decided to say, and as a Minister of Digital Technology, I have to commit this to lay the basis for systemic intelligence that would gather Europe and the democracies from around the world. And this is in particular the theme of the meeting that I'll be organizing with my digital counterparts of the G7 tomorrow to prepare the major event at the end of August that will be talking about digital regulation. Our concern, as we worked of the online hatred as well, that will be presented to Parliament in the next few weeks, and I hope in the future in the work of also of the European Commission. If there's one conviction I want to share with you, it is that the question of the regulation of internet, I think, is a question of survival. It is a question of survival for the web players, but also for democracies, for a very simple reason. If, as is the case today, the only countries who know how to regulate the internet players are authoritarian governments, then that means that the only solutions that work are authoritarian solutions built on bans and interdictions. And if we as liberal democracies are incapable of regulating efficiently and assuring their citizens that they are protected both on and offline, then clearly we have lost the battle. Now, I won't be longer than that, but I'd like to summarize my thought in one sentence. The world of tech has been reaching its maturity. The old world is going to sleep. And it is in this twilight zone, as Gramsci wrote, that monsters can appear, but also hope. Thank you.